right. Well, good to see you guys. Before I dismiss the kids, I want to pray with the dads real quick. So I know you guys are ready to go, but dads, if you would just stand up real quick. We want to pray over you. So if you're a dad and you're in the room, go ahead and stand up, and I want to pray for my dads. It's a healthy crew right there. It's good-looking dads. All right, let me pray. And kids, if you are in the room and you want to hold your daddy's hand and pray with your dad, I know that he would love that. All right, let me pray. Thank you, God, that you would give us the name, that we could share the name Father with you, and I pray that we would continue to seek to do it the way you did, and that we would love the way you've showed us and been with us all along the way. I didn't know how good it was going to be a dad. I'd heard about it. I'd wondered if it was going to be something I could do, but man, I've never been so blessed in my life with the children that you've given me. I thank you, God, for the joy of what it means to be a dad. I pray, God, that you would strengthen the families through the fathers. I know you have a plan for the family, and you want the dads to be strengthened by your courage and your words and your power and your boldness. And I pray, God, that you would speak into their life, that they would know you and lead their family well, that they would pursue you fearlessly and boldly until the end of their days, that they would equip their children to know everything that they can about Jesus, and that they would be a force to be reckoned with for your name because of their dad's influence, because of your influence on us all. We love you. Bless this time. I know for dads, not always looking for a gift, but just to remember that we love you, and that you would help us to see our value in you and to continue to try and do it the way you did. To love unconditionally, to lead with love, and change the world because of what can happen through people like us. God, we love you and we thank you for this day. It's in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen. All right, go kids. You guys are dismissed. Appreciate y'all. Good deal. Okay. Good to be with you guys again. We're in week 2 of this series, Mission Impossible, and talking about the things that God has for us that might seem impossible, but because of what He has done for us, are very, very possible indeed. And so this is kind of a fun storytelling where in the text, we are right in the middle of the Passion Week of Jesus. And so we're talking about the stories of what He went through on that last week that, man, have such an impact on what we do now because of it. Just when I want to tell you kind of a crazy stat I heard, that sometimes I wonder about justice and where it really fits in the world that we live in. We're 70% of the world's lawyers practicing in America. One might think that justice would prevail, but that's not always the case. A burglar recently fell through a skyline while robbing a school. His attorneys charged the school with negligence, and he won over $26,000 in damages. A man in Massachusetts stole a car from a parking lot, then died in a traffic accident. His family sued the parking lot for letting him steal the car and won. In San Francisco, a cab driver corralled a mugger by pinning him against a wall with his taxi. The thief ended up suing because he broke his leg, and so the jury ordered the cabbie to pay the crook $24,000 in excessive force. One lady claimed that she had lost her psychic powers by being injected with dye during a CAT scan. She was awarded nearly $1 million in damages for her loss. And one of the doctors has said, one would wonder if she didn't foresee the problem, that she would avoid the scan altogether. If these small, short stories, you've heard many yourself, of breaches of justice frustrate you, that there's injustice in the world, and the stories we're going to talk about in the scripture today are only going to add to that frustration. I don't know about you, but the older I get, the more I see things on the news or read things, I wonder how deep corruption goes and how much we face. But because of his stories, there is something more to it. And I think just as Jesus was, we too, in some ways, in shape or form, are on trial ourselves. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have Justin and some of my guys in the back read to you some of the text. And so it will be on the screen, and then I'm going to kind of talk to you guys about some of what this is about. And so this is a lot of it. We're going to walk through Matthew 26 and 27, but you're going to hear these stories kind of presented, and then we're going to kind of break this down. So Matthew 27, verses 57 through 68. Go ahead and let them have it, bro.
Those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest. The teachers of the law and the elders had come together there. Not too far away, Peter followed Jesus. He went right up to the courtyard of the high priest. He entered and sat down with the guards to see what would happen. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for something to use against Jesus. They wanted to put him to death. But they did not find any proof, even though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, 2 other witnesses came forward. They said, "This fellow claimed, 'I am able to destroy the temple of God. I can build it again in 3 days.'" Then the high priest stood up. He asked Jesus, "Aren't you going to answer? What are these charges that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, "I command you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." "Yes, it is just as you say," Jesus replied. "But here is what I say to all of you. In days to come, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One. You will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his clothes. He said, "He has spoken a very evil thing against God. Why do we need any more witnesses? You have heard him say this evil thing. What do you think? He must die," they answered. Then they spit in his face. They hit him with their fists. Others slapped him. They said, "Prophesy to us, Christ. Who hit you?"
We'll stop right there for just a second. This is kind of the first group that is on trial, in my opinion, on the text, the Sanhedrin. This is a group of people where they were the elite of the elite in the Jewish culture, and so they had, in their opinion, the corner market on understanding all of who God was. Quite a big thing to assume, and so when any person would challenge the authority that they had, would challenge the way that things were presented to them, this was an issue. Specifically, they had lots of reasons to be upset with Jesus, and I think there would be some corruption, and you'll kind of see that too. But notice what their accusations of Jesus are. In fact, again, this is in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. All 4 Gospels talk about it, but there's some things that are emphasized here I wanted to talk about. The 2 that really get the most attention is some other accusations like he didn't pay his taxes and he was always causing problems were just kind of thrown out because people were throwing these accusations that carried very little weight, if none at all. And so these 2, that the first accusation that he claims that he would destroy the temple, that he would ruin this great thing that we all have come to know and love so well that this can't stand. And Jesus does say things about destroying the temple, but what they don't understand is that he's talking about himself. When he says that this temple will be destroyed in 3 days and built again, that he is the temple. Now, the issue here is that they couldn't, and even if they could, didn't want to see that maybe there's something more to it than they understood. Maybe there's some more to Jesus than they gave him credit for. But what really got them more emotional, as the text kind of shows, is this charge of blasphemy. That this man would claim in any way, shape, or form to be equal with God was unacceptable. And so for them, again, this is a group of people where they wouldn't even feel comfortable to say the name of God out loud. They would just use some of the letters, and they wanted to keep that relationship so holy that even to say his name was not something they considered worth doing because they didn't want to disrespect who he was. So when this rabbi comes in saying that he's equal with God, that he is who he says he is, this is unacceptable. And I think for me, as I really looked into it, I can relate. I think I see myself in the Sanhedrin, and here's what I mean. You know, with any good story, and you see this now, especially with some of the modern shows and television stuff that we watch, where they give you the backstory of the villain. You get to understand where they're coming from. And in this story, in many ways, it'd be easy to say that the Sanhedrin, the people that wanted Jesus dead, are the villain. But think about where they're coming from. This is a group of people that know God and have been studying him their whole life. The elite that have practiced this their whole life. That they think that there's this man that would dishonor God. That who is he to come in and saying that he is equal with God? This is something that in their mind was extremely disrespectful, so much so that they're overwhelmed and they tear their robes because of this outlandish claim. And so for whatever reason, they find themselves in a position where they think that they need to defend God's honor. Who are you to say these things about our God? Because we know that there is no way what you're saying is true. And we're so confident in that you would say anything like you're saying and what you're doing. You know what? We can't have this be. And so I think some of the motive of our villain in this story is that they wanted to defend God's honor. They wanted to understand that, you know what, no one should talk so negative, so crazy about our Father. That's unacceptable. And so I don't know about you, but I've gotten angry before when I think people are saying the wrong things about God, and I somehow have this well that rises up within me that says I have to defend him. And when people say things that I don't agree with, that seem like they're completely contradictory to the God that I know, that stirs my feathers a little bit, gets me a little frustrated. And there are situations and times where I feel like I need to say something about it. But the Sanhedrin and I have this thing in common where God never told me that he needed my help to defend him. But somehow, every once in a while, we take this position in life where we feel like God needs us to defend his honor. And what I'm worried about with these men is that they convicted Jesus of these crimes. And in fact, they are true. Jesus was claiming to be equal with God, and Jesus did intend to show them that the temple wasn't what they thought. But what they didn't understand is that there is the possibility that they were wrong. And so I think for me, for you, maybe the modern day equivalent of the religious elite, right, every once in a while, I don't ever want to get to a place where I'm so convinced that I have everything about God figured out. There is no room for me to hear another side of the story. Now, again, there's more to these people that separate us from them, but I think the mistake they make that I don't want to make is that I have God so figured out, so capsulated, so put together in my mind that there's no way there's some things about him that I don't know. Right? I don't want to get to a place in life where anytime someone says something different than the way I believe, I'm instantly frustrated and turned off by that conversation. Because isn't God bigger than what I can understand in my mind? Isn't there going to be times where I am just flat out wrong? And I think for them, there could have been some redemption if they realized, you know what? Maybe there's more to it, and there's deeper issues for them. Because even if they wanted to see that maybe there is something to this guy, because he was always helping people and he wanted to do some really good things, so maybe there's some power in what he's saying, but they didn't want to. Because I think they didn't want to consider that there's a way of looking at God that's different than what they've done their whole life. And so I think the sin of pride and of this truth that they were so convinced was right kept them from God. So much so that they were the ones that accused him and put him on trial. And all at the same time, Jesus loved the people that did that to him. And then even more, these soldiers, where we get some kind of hint at it, but they played this game with Jesus as he was convicted, and in their possession, they blindfolded him and thought that if he could prophesy and he knew what was going to happen, that he would know which one of them were going to hit him. And so they covered up his eyes and would take turns from different angles, punching him as hard as they could, and thinking if he really was who he says he was, that he would know which one was going to do it. And I think at this point in the story, this is where the text is fulfilled, the Old Testament prophecy, that he was beaten beyond description and that we wouldn't recognize him. And he didn't say a word and knew that this was what was supposed to happen. And so there are many people on trial in these stories. And I don't think it's just Jesus. And so this first group of people, if there's something that I want to learn from them, that I would want to challenge you with, is don't be so confident that you've got it all figured out. And that sometimes your good intentions, like theirs, can put Jesus on the cross. And so be willing to understand that God's bigger than you give him credit for. And as close as you may think you are to him, you don't have it all figured out. And we're in process, and we're in movement, getting closer and closer to him. But I think the biggest issue for them is that they didn't want to be wrong. They didn't want to have a scenario where what they've done their whole life was now broken, now false. And so don't be so prideful to think that what you know about God your whole life is somehow worth making you more valuable, or your opinion more louder, right? And so consider that there's some times in your life that God might want to speak to you that you need to listen. And I bring this up in context of Mission Impossible because I don't want you to look at outreach in a way where you say, you know what, there's people that are lost, that are so distant from God, and that they're completely backwards, and I've got all the answers, let's talk. I think there are times where, as Christians, that we want to share our faith with other people. We have to give them credit enough to say, you know what? I know a guy who's changed my life, but I don't have it all figured out myself either. And I think there's an honesty that comes with that. There's a vulnerability that comes with that. And I would even go as far as saying there are moments in life where God will teach the Christian about his nature through the one that isn't Christian. And so God speaks all the time. And don't assume as you pursue people that don't know Jesus that you have all the answers. Because in fact, I think that'll turn them off, and it probably won't give a lot of glory to God anyway. So consider that we don't always have it right. Sometimes we mess up. And I hope to God that we never get it so wrong that we put him on the cross like they did. So that's kind of one of the things I learned about the Sanhedrin. There's more to them. They are corrupt through and through. You're going to see that in the text here as we go. So let's jump into story part 2. I want to talk to you about another couple characters that we catch up with in Matthew 26 and 27.
Peter was sitting out in the courtyard. A female servant came to him. "You also were with Jesus of Galilee," she said. But in front of all of them, Peter said he was not. "I do not know what you are talking about," he said. Then he went out of the gate leading into the courtyard. There, another woman saw him. She said to the people, "This fellow is with Jesus of Nazareth." Again, he said he was not. With an oath, he said, "I do not know the man." After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter. "You must be one of them," they said. "The way you talk gives you away." Then Peter began to call down curses on himself. He took an oath and said to them, "I don't know the man." Right away, a rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered what Jesus had said. "The rooster will crow," Jesus had told him. "Before it does, you will say 3 times that you do not know me." Peter went outside. He broke down and sobbed. It was early in the morning. All the chief priests and the elders of the people decided to put Jesus to death. They tied him up and led him away. Then they handed him over to Pilate, who was the governor. Judas, who had handed him over, saw that Jesus had been sentenced to die. He felt deep shame and sadness for what he had done. So he returned the 30 silver coins to the chief priests and the elders. "I have sinned," he said. "I handed over a man who was not guilty." "What do we care?" they replied. "That's your problem." So Judas threw the money into the temple and left. Then he went away and hanged himself. The chief priests picked up the coins. They said, "It's against the law to put this money into the temple fund. It's blood money. It has paid for a man's death." So they decided to use the money to buy a potter's field. People from other countries would be buried there. That is why it has been called the Field of Blood to this very day. Then the word spoken by Jeremiah the prophet came true. He had said, they took the 30 silver coins. That price was set for him by the people of Israel. They used the coins to buy a potter's field, just as the Lord commanded me.
Good deal. Thank you. Peter and Judas. I think on purpose, again, in all 4 Gospels we see these characters, and they're often put together in the telling of the text, where you see Peter's denial and you see Judas's choice to commit suicide. And they're meant, I think, in a lot of ways, to compare and contrast, where there are some similarities between the two. They both, in their own way, deny Jesus. But what is so crucial in these stories is kind of what they do after the fact. And so you know the story, and you've seen where Peter makes these choices. And I have this kind of creative license that makes me think he didn't just kind of, after the incident in the garden the night before, and he cut the guy's ear, and Jesus took care of that, and Jesus is whisked away. Peter is kind of stuck in this moment of, okay, what do I do next? And where we catch up with him is here in this text, where that he pursued the courtyard. He wanted to see the trial that was taking place. And again, in this text, I'm convinced Jesus is not the only one on trial. And so Peter, I think, is actually trying to kind of wear a hood and get as close as he can to the action. And I think, honestly, knowing Peter, I don't think it was just to kind of see what was going to happen. I think he was trying to position himself to have some kind of covert op to get Jesus out of the scenario. He wanted to get as close as he could and was thinking something might happen. Part of me says he probably overheard soldiers talking about how they captured the king and he was no issue at all. And I'm sure Peter just had his blood boiling at the bragging and the insults that people had against Jesus. And he was in a moment, I can't even imagine, of uncertainty, of discomfort. And so I can see this moment for him where he's confused, he's overwhelmed, and he doesn't want to deal with what's going on. He just wants to see Jesus. Now, the text doesn't show us that, but I think they do see each other. There's these denials. There's the first 2, as the text points out so clearly, and I think almost in a cinematic kind of lens that Jesus and Peter connect eyes across this courtyard as Peter denies him the 3rd time and hears this rooster crow, because they were close enough to where I think this overwhelming moment broke his heart. And again, whenever I get to do this with you guys, I have to put myself in the text and think about where I'm at. And I don't know about denying Jesus. I don't know that I've ever been in a position verbally where I've dishonored who he is or said that I don't believe. I know with my actions I sure have. Well, I'll tell you what, though, one of the closest things I can relate to that I feel like I denied Jesus, this is just kind of weird, but I'm going to tell you guys. When I was deciding to go into ministry, again, my story is that I met Jesus when I was in high school. I found out that he was who he says he was, and it changed my life, and I wanted to know him better. And so I pursued Bible college and was making those choices, and this all kind of happened in a year, kind of rush of life happened for me, 17, 18, and a lot going on in my life. And of course, up until that point, I had a lot of friends that were not Christians and wondering why I was doing what I was doing. And so I don't remember a lot of the conversations with my friends and why I chose to do what I was going to do and where this all came from. But I'll never forget the one conversation I had with one of my good friends, Ryan Lundy, his dad. I was at Ryan's house when we were goofing off, and his dad said, you're going to leave, because I graduated high school early, you're going to leave high school and go to Bible college? Why are you going to, very critical, kind of unsure. And I think I was trying to be funny, but I said to him, I said, well, there's good money in it, it'll be good. And he kind of was like, oh, okay, and walked off. And I don't know why I said that, because there isn't. And that's not why you do it. But I think I was trying to be funny. I think I was trying to connect with my friend's dad. And man, many, many years later, I'll never forget that. Of all the things I could have said, that's why I'm pursuing Jesus. And so, in little ways and sometimes in big ones, there are moments in my life where I wonder, and I wish I could take that back. I wish I didn't have to do what I just did, but I understand the denial. I understand the emotions of the moment for Peter. And of all the characters, all the disciples, it's very easy to relate with his passion that drives him to make good decisions and often very bad ones. And we find Peter in contrast with Judas at the very same time. And I think in a lot of ways the text does kind of hold them next to each other because literally the events of their stories happen very similar in timing. It's hard to kind of pinpoint exactly the timing of all the things that happened for Judas, but here's what I see, is that in this text, he has a moment of, what did I just do? Overwhelmed by his decision. And thinks that maybe there'll be some credit, some credence, some value in bringing the money back. That maybe that'll do something to help my situation because I didn't want it to be about money. And now I'm realizing what I've done and how horrible this might be, and I want to go back on it. And we catch up with the Pharisee or the Sanhedrin again, and again, this shows the perfect picture of their corruption. That they get the money back, and we don't want that. It's not for us anymore. We got what we wanted. We can use it for this field because we can't keep it. And if their goal was truly to defend God, or their goal was really to do what they needed to do to glorify God, to kind of sell out this guy and do what they did, you can see that their motives weren't pure. That they didn't have the right idea in mind at all. And so I think I see that these people who, again, wore the robes and played the part, and you would have thought were close to God, were in fact the furthest from him. And so they gave Judas very little option of any kind of redemption, and he was seeking the wrong place anyway for that. And in his overwhelming frustration and his overwhelming despair, there is no plan in the text that I can see that he in any way wanted to go see Jesus. He made his decision to give in to the guilt and the despair and thought there was no hope. And so he took a rope and went out to a tree and ended his life. And the text, again, doesn't give us exactly the right timeline, but I think this would have happened on Friday. And I think that his body would have been attached to this tree all of Friday night into Saturday, and that was shaken loose on Sunday because of an earthquake. You'll hear about later. And that his body fell from this tree into this field and burst after the bloating from days of hanging on a tree into this trash heap of Gehenna that has other significance in the text as well. And it just paints a picture of two very different people. And so you see these compare and contrast. And I just want you to think about a little bit more of who they are and what happens. So Peter follows Jesus into the courtyard after that he was arrested for trial, and Judas left Jesus at the community table, at the communion meal. At one of the best times that they had together, that's when Judas left. That Peter sought to help Jesus somehow in the escape and wanted to do something about the situation, and Judas delivered him into the enemy hands, right? Peter acted foolishly under pressure. I get that. But Judas premeditated his betrayal. Very different. Peter denied knowing Jesus to save himself. Judas betrayed him for financial gain and lack of understanding. Jesus predicted that Peter would be reinstated. And Jesus predicted that Judas would have ultimate demise. Peter, the biggest difference to me that I want you to think about is that Peter, he repented. And Judas, he just felt sorry. And so what I want you to think about is the times that you deny Jesus through your words or through your actions, those moments where you make the wrong choice. In that moment, you are on trial in a way, and you have an option where you can go seek Jesus out. Because in the middle of Peter and his betrayal, he went back to Jesus. And as the text shows later, as he's resurrected, and you know this, where they have this conversation, and Jesus asks Peter, "Do you love me?" And he says, "Yes, I do." And this conversation goes, and he asks him 3 times, and there's this common thread in this conversation that Jesus always has and always will offer love in regards to our statements of lack of, our decisions to be less than we should be. And so there is no denial in our lives that are so grave that we can't go back to Him. Because it is seemingly that His tool that He uses and calls us to use all the time is that of love. And so Judas, as far as we know, had no plan to go back to Jesus to look for any kind of love. And I'm not going to say that he would have if he did, but I have a feeling Jesus is capable of doing anything, and that it might have been different. But he was overwhelmed by his guilt, by his decision to betray the king that he didn't even try. There are many, many times in my life, and unfortunately will continue to be, just like yours, where you will make mistakes. And in your guilt, in your remorse, in your sorrow, He does not want you to stay in that. And don't let that overwhelm you so much so to where you think there is no option other than giving your life up. I don't understand suicide. I don't get how someone could get to that place, but I think I get the path to get there. And that's to be so overwhelmed by your own guilt or whatever the situation might be that you don't see any hope. But man, if there's something I see that these gentlemen being on trial for was that there's always more to the story, and that Jesus can redeem any situation that might seem too much to handle. And so for you, just remember that as you have been called with a great mission to share about the love of Christ with all kinds of people in all different walks of life, you are never too unworthy to share of His glory. There is nothing in you that is unworthy of the message. You will make mistakes, and you will have conversations like I have, where you say the wrong thing. And with your actions, if you're like me, you'll make the wrong choice often. But there is always a love that you get to go back to. And so if you in any way, shape, or form have said, I can't share my faith because I've messed up, that is an excuse that you are not able to hold any longer. You have no good reason under the King to refuse an opportunity to share your faith with other people. There is no unworthiness that lays still in your heart because He separated the sin from you. That He reinstated who you are and gave you the keys of His kingdom, even in your sin, and said, I believe that you can do this. And there is no denial that you've ever been a part of. There is no sin too great that cannot be conquered by this King. And so don't let that guilt, don't let that remorse, don't let that pity, don't let that anger, whatever that is that makes you feel hopeless, keep you from the one that gives hope. Because you are redeemed. You are loved. And He will reinstate you as He did with Peter. And just know that in your moments where you think you've done so wrong that you can't be fixed, don't ever run and hide alone. Don't ever run and hide it by yourself, because it will fester and grow into a feeling that you cannot escape. You need other people, and you need Him. Don't ever feel like, regardless of the decisions that you make, the good ones and the bad ones, that you are far enough away from Him, because He will save you and set you free, because He did it before and He will do it again. Don't miss that. And so it isn't just Jesus on trial. It's not just the characters in the story. I think in some ways it's us as well. But there's more to the story. I want to jump in, and if you would, go ahead and read the third chunk of the story this morning and get us going.
Jesus was standing in front of the governor. The governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Yes, it is just as you say," Jesus replied. But when the chief priests and the elders brought charges against him, he did not answer. Then Pilate asked him, "Don't you hear the charges they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge. The governor was really amazed. It was the governor's practice at the Passover feast to let one prisoner go free. The people could choose the one they wanted. At that time, they had a well-known prisoner named Barabbas. So when the crowd gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which one do you want me to set free, Barabbas or Jesus who was called Christ?" Pilate knew that the leaders were jealous. He knew that this is why they handed Jesus over to him. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him a message. It said, "Don't have anything to do with that man. He is not guilty. I have suffered a great deal in a dream today because of him." But the chief priests and the elders talked the crowd into asking for Barabbas and having Jesus put to death. "Which of the two do you want me to set free?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "Then what should I do with Jesus who is called Christ?" Pilate asked. They all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What wrong has he done?" asked Pilate. But they shouted even louder, "Crucify him." Pilate saw that he wasn't getting anywhere. Instead, the crowd was starting to get angry. So he took water and washed his hands in front of them. "I am not guilty of this man's death," he said. "You are accountable for that." All the people answered, "We and our children will accept the guilt for his death." Pilate let Barabbas go free, but he had Jesus whipped. Then he handed him over to be nailed to a cross. The governor's soldiers took Jesus into the palace, which was called the Praetorium. All the rest of the soldiers gathered around him. They took off his clothes and put a purple robe on him. Then they twisted thorns together to make a crown. They placed it on his head. They put a stick in his right hand. Then they fell on their knees in front of him and made fun of him. "We honor you, King of the Jews," they said. They spit on him. They hit him on the head with the stick again and again. After they had made fun of him, they took off the robe. They put his own clothes back on him. They led him away to nail him to a cross.
Pilate is the first character introduced here that I think is on trial as well. The Sanhedrin, the Jewish authority, had a way of going about trial, but they had limitations on what they could do with their convictions, and so they wanted a steeper punishment for Jesus, and they brought him to Pilate, who was over the Roman authority and had more power to do more harm to Jesus. And so they brought this situation to Pilate. Pilate, as the text shows in this text and others, he didn't want to have anything to do with this. He knew that something was different about this. And so as they brought this convicted felon, in their opinion, to Pilate, Pilate had a conversation with him and tried to understand what was going on. And honestly, I just think a lot of it just went over his head. And he wasn't sure what was really in front of him. But he kind of got lucky because as he was trying to figure out what to do, and that this man was saying that he was truth and that he was the king, and that he was silent, and it didn't quite add up, and he felt like he didn't need to have this man crucified of anything, and so wasn't sure what to do. And he goes back out to the crowd, and they're hurling insults at him, and one of them yells something about he's send back this man from Galilee, he's this and that, and has all these negative things to say, and Pilate hears this. Wait, what'd you say? He's from over here? He's from Galilee, so that's not my jurisdiction. It's not my authority to persecute him anyway. Perfect. You know what? Let's send him to Herod. He'd be the other one in that jurisdiction where he would be the one to put Jesus on trial. Awesome. First attempt to wash his hands of the situation. And so wants to send Jesus to him. And now Jesus is sent to, again, you see this in some of the other texts that kind of brushes that over here. Jesus is sent to Herod. And in an ironic kind of twist, Herod named the King of the Jews as having a conversation with the King of the Jews. And Jesus says absolutely nothing. And Herod, a very evil man in his own right, is trying to kind of raise out of him some questions and get some information, because he would love the opportunity to make it even worse for Jesus if he could. But Jesus doesn't have anything to say, and keeps his mouth silent the whole time. In fact, I think that's part of why it's not on here, because it just seems less dramatic. And so Herod finds himself in a position where he's like, well, I would love to do something to harm this man, but he said nothing. He will not talk to me. And so my hands are tied. I got to send him back. You've had better luck, Pilate, so let's see what happens. So Pilate now is like, well, great. I've got to deal with this again. And I feel like he's not guilty. I feel like this... I'm not sure what to do. And so I can't remember now what they call it, but it's this magnanimous grace. It says, hey, I got a loophole. You know what? I'm going to, because this is the week of Passover, because I want to celebrate that with you guys, we have this option. I can set someone free. So I'm going to offer you Barabbas, right? This famous criminal. I'm going to offer you Jesus. And everyone knows, like, hey, Barabbas is not a good dude. He was convicted for probably all kinds of things, but specifically murder and theft, and not a guy that you want to be free around other people. And they were seeing blood red, and they didn't care and thought, you know what, no, it's got to be Jesus. And so Pilate thought he had this opportunity to set Jesus free, and they didn't want anything to do with that idea. And so they accepted Barabbas back into their arms, and Jesus is now still on trial. And so Pilate's, okay, well, I tried that, and that didn't work. Man, to crucify him for someone that I don't know that he's guilty. And then his wife comes in. Something's off with this one, right? And I don't know, for the dads in the room, when your wife walks in and has this feeling that something's off, you listen to that. You tend to notice that one, at least I do. And it's one of those things where I'm always trying to listen. And so he's not sure what to do and doesn't feel like crucifying him would be the right thing. And so they have him whipped, as the text says. But as I studied that, it isn't just kind of the whipping maybe that you might have been taught, or what whipping in your mind, Indiana Jones might look like. This was something called flogging or scourging, and so they would have two Roman soldiers kind of take part in this brutal punishment, and they wanted everyone in the courtyard to see it. And so they would, whether it was a post about as high as the stage or a pillar or a wall, they would chain the victim to the pole or to the stump. They would take off all of his clothes, and these two soldiers wouldn't stand with a normal whip, but they would kind of stand on either side of him. If this is Jesus, they would stand on either side, and it wasn't like a normal whip. It was called a cat of nine tails, and it had a couple different strands of leather coming off of it, and on them they would kind of tie in different little trinkets to kind of make this more brutal of a punishment. And so there'd be pieces of rock or stone, or marble, or things that would kind of leave some welts and bruises, but they'd also kind of tie within it, they like pieces of sheep bone or glass or whatever they could put in this, so that it kind of worked together, and it was a heavier kind of big whip. And so what they would do is they stand on either side. They would kind of start up at the shoulder and work their way down to the calf, and kind of work together and kind of crisscross, like tic-tac-toe, whip down the victim's back. And the way this worked is that because it had a lot of weight to it with all the stone on it, it would bruise very quickly. And then now, because of the bruised soft tissue, the bone and whatever sharp objects would just rip it to pieces. And so they had this kind of checkered plan where they would work their way down the back and exposing the vertebrae and completely stripping the flesh of the victim's back all the way down to their legs. Oftentimes, the victim would go blind as a bone came around and took their eye out, or often the victim would die because it would come around so much to where it would rip the intestines out of their stomach. And so Jesus went through that. Barely able to stand, they stood to his feet and they put a robe on him to mock who he said he was. The crown of thorns on his head, and Pilate thought maybe that would have done the trick. That would satisfy their desire for whatever it was. And still they shout all the louder to crucify Jesus. There's a lot of people on trial in this text. I think where I relate with Pilate is that, there are situations in our life, and we try to do the right thing, and sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. In my opinion, for me, if there's any trial that I'm worried about, it isn't that of my condemnation, because I know I've been set free. It is the trials in my life of opportunity. It is the moments that God has set up for me to walk through, and I still choose sometimes not to. I think for Pilate, he could have done different things. In fact, he was only in power for another 36 months after this. In fact, he was dethroned because he couldn't handle situations that required good discernment. And so he sold out Jesus for a couple extra months in leadership. And you can't be too hard on the guy because sometimes we sell him out for a lot less. I'm not worried about you, that your trial in your life is that you have too many sins that can be forgiven. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried that there are divine opportunities for you. And because of what you know that Jesus did for you, I don't think it is fair for us in the trials of our life to do nothing. You know, we're talking about living on mission and sharing our faith with people. He did all that for you. He did all of that for you. And in the trials of my life, I don't want to say that I did nothing. I don't want to say that those people that needed to know they were set free too, that I just chose to keep it for myself. I don't want to look back on my life and the trials and the opportunities that God puts in front of me and do nothing with that opportunity. There are people in your life that don't know about Jesus, that don't know that they've been set free, that don't know that He did all of that for them. And I don't want to miss those opportunities. I don't want to see those divine moments that God puts in front of us all the time, that He's equipped us for, that He's made us capable of, and do nothing because of it. Because if Jesus did what He did for us, if He gave us the power, the authority, the love that He did, if He really believed that we were worth going through what He went through for us, how is it acceptable for me to just do nothing about that? It is the trial that I am most afraid of, that I would not act in the moment of love that I've been called to. And so, week 2, Mission Impossible. There are moments that will seem impossible in your life, and I don't know what they look like for you. I don't know who that conversation might be with and what it might entail, and it might look really, really, really scary to you. But I don't want to get to the end of my life and realize that there were moments in my life that I had opportunity and I did nothing with them, because I know what He did for me. And He hasn't even hung on the cross yet. And I don't want to get to the end of my days and wish that I acted, because you have been set free. Your trial is not for your salvation. You've been given the keys of eternity. But I do think the verdict is still out if you will act when God gave you the moment to do it. Because He has a habit, and He shows it all throughout the text, of partnering with His kids. As a good father would, He wants to equip you with all that you need to be successful. And He's giving you all the information, all the passion, all the giftedness, all that you would ever need inside of you. Right now in your heart, He's giving you everything you need to share the gospel with other people. You have lack of nothing. And so he did what He did. And what I think I'm missing sometimes is that I stop with Jesus saved me from my sin. But and Dave McGrew so eloquently put a couple weeks back that He didn't just save us from our sin, but He saved us for other people. You weren't just set free and given the keys of eternal life so that you could enjoy it all by yourself. You were given that great gift and that great message so that you could go bring it to other people. It is meant to be delivered through you. He could have done it in a million different ways. He could have proclaimed it on the highest mountain in the loudest voices, but He chose to do it through you. You are the voice that He wanted to have heard so loud. You are the lives that He wanted to have, that people would know that there is no argument in the honest love that I see from these people. You are the tool that He chose. As He died on the cross, He chose you to bring that message. And yes, it will seem impossible sometimes, I know. But there is a mission that you've been sent on. And because He faced the impossible, it is no longer impossible for you. And if you're unsure what to do, in all the ways that make sense and all the ones that don't, I would ask that you would go, church, that you would live up to the name, that you would understand what it means to live on purpose, on mission, and for other people. And God will sort out the details, and we'll work together as He gets the glory for it. But don't do nothing. Decide what that might be, and let us help you figure out those steps. Because we're here for you, and we believe that it's worth giving everything to. Let me pray for you, and we'll enjoy the rest of the day and get to come back and hear the rest of the story next weekend. But best thing I need to do right now is just pray. Except sometimes I don't want to. Can't really fake it with you. You know our hearts, and you know where we lack, but you made us able. And the stories teach us that I don't ever want to feel so right that I don't see you, and I don't ever want to be so overwhelmed by my wrong that I choose not to look for you either. God, help me to live in the tension that I am a work in progress. And I only want to get better at this. I don't want my guilt to keep me from acting. I don't want to have my failures keep me paralyzed. I want the strength of your story to empower mine. I don't know how it's all going to work out, but I know I don't want to miss any of it. I don't want to miss those moments you have. So please, whatever those look like for each and every one of us, that we wouldn't miss those moments. You've given us great opportunity. We are all so capable. It is not some minister up on the stage and a bunch of people kind of listening in. We are all part of this together, and you have created us for so much more than we give ourselves credit for. So help us not to miss those divine moments, those opportunities that you put in front of us, and to face the impossible that you made possible. I love you with all my heart. And I thank you for Father's Day, that I get to enjoy family that I didn't deserve. I get to enjoy hope that wasn't mine, but it is now. And that I could, as much as I enjoy my kids, man, I get to love being a part of your family and being in a relationship with a really, really good Father. I love you, God. I thank you for setting us free and giving us hope that changed everything. Pray for a good day and help us to enjoy our dads and a good time together. And, man, in the moments that you present us, God, I pray we act. I love you so much, God. I thank you. It's in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen. All right, guys, like I said, there are cards in the back. There's information if you need it. Love you guys. Kind of getting past some of that stuff, but if you got questions, anything we can do, we're here always to help you, but you guys got a mission, you can do it. So have a great week. We love you guys. God bless.